All right, let's talk about Wes Anderson's latest film, Asteroid City. Wes Anderson is perhaps a little bit of a polarizing filmmaker. I am a big fan, though. He's one of those prolific filmmakers that helped refine my cinephilia when I was in high school and in college. And so I've had a long, rich history with Wes Anderson. And while there's certainly some debate over is he style over substance, I emphatically wholly disagree with that idea. While Wes has a distinct uniform style, I think it's a little disingenuous to put him into a little bit of a corner when you look at everything from Bottle Rocket to the Royal Tenenbaums to Darjeeling Limited, Life Aquatic. Those early films, you see the seeds of who Wes would become, but that dollhouse aesthetic that he is popular for now, that would come a little bit later with films like Moonrise Kingdom and The Grand Budapest Hotel. His animated films, Fantastic Mr. Fox and Isle of Dogs, they certainly play into that as well. Although I do think his animated films distinct themselves from his live action work as well. And in the last 2 years, with The French Dispatch, and now here we are with Asteroid City, we are in a new experimental era of Wes Anderson that I am utterly here for. Yes, these last two films have that dollhouse aesthetic, the framing and composition, the editing, the music, the humor even. You see the DNA of that in these last two films, but I think they are so distinct from what Wes has been known for over the last decade or so, especially when you consider how Wes is toying with the structure of The French Dispatch and Asteroid City. You get the anthology of The French Dispatch. And with Asteroid City, the framing device is this play within a movie, or this play within a play is essentially how it acts out. And I love how Anderson is toying with cinematic language between the film and the stage in Asteroid City, and how this play within a movie informs what's really going on as it relates to writing, intention, and interpretation, because those things can become muddled. And in this context, I think Anderson is trying to use both mediums to say something about art and how it helps us see the world, especially when we don't always understand what's happening around us. And that is a big part of Asteroid City. When you look at the experimentation he's doing in The French Dispatch, it's this commentary of sorts on the art of journalism and what it used to be before it evolved into hollow clickbait. Everything is so deeply tethered to this looming ghost of Arthur Howitzer Jr., played by Bill Murray in that film, and his magazine, and how the film was these stories that became a tribute to him, and these stories defined him. And in addition to that, I think what's so distinctive about The French Dispatch and now Asteroid City is tone, because they are vividly more somber in tone. There's an anguish to these movies that we just haven't seen since the Royal Tenenbaums in 2001. And I love that, especially with Asteroid City. And this is where, again, I push back so heavily on this idea of style versus substance, because there is extremely lucid depictions of longing and loss and grief in this film that comes through wonderfully, I think. There's much less humor here, and I would argue in The French Dispatch as well, but maybe even less humor in Asteroid City. You certainly get it in spades in Asteroid City. It is there, It's more subtle. It's even drier than usual with Wes Anderson. But Asteroid City is a movie that has much less writing than what we typically get with Wes Anderson. And that's another thing that makes Asteroid City so fascinating to me, because when you think of Wes Anderson, you immediately think of his visuals and how unique they are. But the other thing that has defined Wes over the years is his writing. He's been nominated for 3 Oscars, I believe. Probably should have been nominated for a few more. But there's really not a lot of writing in this film comparatively to his other works. And there is so much to ruminate on in Asteroid City as it relates to longing and connection, grief and closure, and even our place in the universe. And I do think the writing here is exquisite, but more so than any other film, or at least, again, since the Royal Tenenbaums, I think this is a performance driven film, because often it is reliant on these visual cues and these internalized reflections that we see in these characters. When you look at Augie, played by Jason Schwartzman, one of our central figures here, there's a moment early on where he's telling his kids about what happened to their mother, or his somber exchanges with the Midge character in the window, Midge played by Scarlett Johansson. There's a moment with the Clifford character when he is revealing why he's incessantly asking people to dare him. And it is this sudden, unexpected moment of poignancy. Or there's June and how she reacts to her class, or even to the Montana character. There's the Woodrow character and how he reverberates primarily through subtlety. There's a moment Augie has with Conrad Earp, played by Edward Norton in this film, that's oddly touching with how that crystallizes. And then later on in the film, he has a moment with Schubert, played by Adrien Brody, which to me is one of the most striking moments in the film. And then there's, and maybe this is a little bit of a spoiler, although she is mentioned on the poster and in the marketing, Margot Robbie is in this film and she plays an actress, an unnamed actress. And Augie has this incredible moment with her at the end of the film that is so tender and heartfelt. And again, while I do enjoy the writing here and how lavishing it is with these characters and the longing that they do reverberate, it really is the performances that make it as arresting and as spellbinding as it is. And I think all of that culminates incredibly well with the cinematography and the set design and everything that Anderson is doing aesthetically. And to me, when you consider all of those factors, this is a filmmaker that is evolving right before our eyes. And I love how he is, again, toying with the camera, how it is helping shape what this movie is as a play within a movie. I go back to one of the early moments when we first arrive at Asteroid City. There's this incredible moment where the camera has this long pan and it reverberates that symmetry that Wes Anderson is known for. It then turns 90 degrees to the right, then another 90 degrees. So we've gone a full 180, and eventually it makes this 360 spin. And that in and of itself isn't compelling. We've seen Wes Anderson move the camera in that way before. I think what's interesting about what he's doing there in establishing the setting as it relates to this being a work of cinema. However, the film is functioning as this stage play. And when you think about going to the theater, that is a one-dimensional view. Yes, the set design in the theater can add texture, but you don't get that 360 view when you're watching a stage play in a theater setting. So again, I love how he's using the camera here to help inform this film's ideas on cinema and theater, how those things are complementing each other in this film, not just narratively, not just in terms of a framing device, but aesthetically as well. And you couple that with the actual set design of Asteroid City, which I think is wonderful as well, because there is a staginess to it when you think of something like the Royal Tenenbaums, for example, or even the Grand Budapest Hotel. Those characters are living in a much more tangible world, in a much more tangible setting. Asteroid City is very intentionally fake, for the lack of a better term. Like there's a staginess to it. There's a lot of matte paintings. There's a ramp that is unfinished because you can't have a full highway and a full highway ramp on a stage play. The buildings are smaller. And so I love how he's toying with the camera again to help inform the cinematic landscape of what this film is as a movie and also as a stage play. And then also just in terms of subverting Wes Anderson tropes, I think about those scenes between Midge and Augie that are pretty crucial to this film. We get several of them. And again, tonally, they help inform the somber nature of this film and those two characters, the parallels between them as far as love and loss and how that brings them together. However, the way those shots are composed, they don't invoke that traditional Wes Anderson symmetry. They are very much off center. And I don't know if that was a purposeful choice to subvert himself or to subvert that ideal of classic Wes Anderson. I don't know, especially off the heels of all of these insane and terrible AI videos of him. But there are moments like that in this film where he goes out of his way to do something more distinctive that plays into that experimentation that he's been doing in these last two films. And also, I just love how bizarre this film gets. He's known for his eccentricity. Wes Anderson has a quirkiness to him that a lot of people just love or hate. I obviously love him. And I still think that even inside the film's somber tones, and maybe this is perhaps why I love this film as much as I do, because I don't think those grounded emotions are lost at all, but I do love how weird this film gets in terms of its existentialism on the universe, our place in it, and where this film goes in that regard. I mean, it is titled Asteroid City, so there's a spatial element to what's going on here. And the out of this world elements at play, I'll say vaguely, are really great. It's a little funny in places, for sure, but that humor, I don't think, overpowers the somber tones of this film. And ultimately, I love how Wes is able to thread that needle in terms of humor, both visually and in terms of dialogue, but also how the characters are able to carry over those ideas of longing and connection, and how it gets quite meta at times with this being a movie within a play, or a play within a movie, rather. There's some really interesting turns in that regard that I really like here as well. So I like all of his movies. I think, again, that notion of style versus substance, I think misses nuance. If you simply look at his aesthetics, perhaps his casting choices, sure, there's an element to that where if that's all you looked at, it could simply seem as style and nothing more. But when you really dig into his movies, there's a lot going on there, all the way back to The Royal Tenenbaums, which I think is one of the best movies ever made. That's in my top 50 of all time. That is an incredible movie that has great depth to it, but when you look at a lot of his films, there is a thematic richness to them. And I think that richness has only gotten better as time has gone on. And now he's evolving as a filmmaker who's willing to experiment a little bit more. And I love that about Wes and what he's doing. So, take that for what it's worth. I understand that Wes is a little bit polarizing in some ways. And these last two films have been a little bit polarizing because he is going outside of his convention. And I kind of love that. I love that. And to me, I think that's what makes The French Dispatch and now Asteroid City two of my favorite Wes films. Asteroid City in particular is in my top 5 Wes Anderson movies. So as I wind down here, I quickly wanted to reiterate, though, as much as I love the filmmaking and that evolution of Wes that I've been talking about, I do want to emphasize these performances one more time because I did mention that this was a performance-driven film. And I find that in and of itself a little bit fascinating because over the last decade or so, one of those West tropes are these extensive casts. And oftentimes it's characters coming and going for a comedic gag. And that certainly is the case here in spades. But because this film has less writing comparatively, it is so performance driven that I did want to highlight Jason Schwartzman. He's really great here as Augie. There's a lot going on here where the film will pause. It'll linger on Schwartzman, and he has to evoke a lot through his facial tics, his mannerisms, his tears even. And I think the film is very good at giving him the space to do that. Same thing with Scarlett Johansson, and I do love their dynamic throughout the film. I think it's really great. Tom Hanks, I think, is good in a small role here. Jeffrey Wright, similarly, has a much more comedic role here than what he had in The French Dispatch, but I think he's very good. Bryan Cranston as the narrator, I think, is good. Edward Norton and Adrien Brody, I think, are quite excellent in their limited screen time here. Liv Schreiber, Hope Davis, Stephen Park, Rupert Friend. Maya Hawke is really great. Steve Carell, I think, is very good. Like this cast, and it goes on and on. Willem Dafoe, I mentioned Margot Robbie earlier. Tony Revolori. So, like, yes, it has an extensive cast, and many of these characters are supporting roles. They're not asked to do a whole lot, but in addition to their dialogue, more than a lot of other Wes Anderson films, he pauses and lets them react to the camera, gives them those lingering moments of humanity to come through. And I think they do a great job. They do a really great job. I really do love this cast and these performances quite a bit. So anyway, with that said, we do have a podcast review of this where we go much more in depth on it. If you want to check that out here on YouTube or on your podcast app of choice, there's a written review of this up at InSessionFilm.com as well. Leave a comment below. Let me know if you agree or disagree with anything I had to say here, and we will see you next time.